You know, this is, excuse me, a damn fine cup of coffee.
Tonight, we are continuing to delve through the great John A. Keel's Strange Creatures from Time and Space, the best on-the-ground history of the great cryptid explosion of the 1950s and 60s, which is still the greatest unknown, untruly reported on event in American paranormal history. It was a UFO flap. It was an entity flap that was going on from the East Coast to the West Coast and around the world. People were seeing UFOs, lights in the sky, entities running by, Bigfoots, gray aliens, Mothman, you name it. One of these entities that could be connected to Mothman is called the Grinning Man. Now, the Grinning Man could be found all over the place. He's in video games, movies, but usually he's connected to the East Coast in America and Mothman. The best information you're ever going to get on Grinning Man is from John A. Keel, and I'll tell you why. John A. Keel was on the ground during the Grinning Man encounters. He went to West Virginia. He went and interviewed people who saw the creature all over the United States, not only in West Virginia. This story of Grinning Man is going to take us from the East Coast to the West Coast and even to jolly old London. Enough of the babbling on. Let's get to the wasteland. Let's get to the fun stuff, the reading. Now, before we get down to the history of the Grinning Man, this entity that might or might not be connected to Mothman, this entity that walked out of the great cryptid and UFO flap of the 1950s and 60s, if you've ever had an encounter with the unknown, a ghostie, a ghoulie, a Bigfoot, a Yeti, anything like that, demons, angels, whatever, please let me know, because as always,
we're ready to believe you.
we're ready to believe, and I want to hear those stories. But let's dive in to the words from the man himself. Keel. A blazing white light, as big as a car, nearly scraped the 550-foot tall television tower outside of Pompton Lakes, New Jersey, site of the large DuPont explosives factory, on the night of October 11th, 1966. A policeman and his wife watched the object move slowly northward and disappear beyond the neighboring hills. So think about this with New Jersey. That's all I'm saying. Right now, they were very recently dealing with drones in the sky. We also have, since ancient times, the reports of the Jersey Devil. And then also in 1966, lights in the sky and a strange creature running by. Now cited by not only a policeman and his wife, but then another patrolman over a hill had an encounter, a Sergeant Benjamin Thompson. Very reminiscent as well to the modern-day Vegas encounter and the Hopkinsonville Goblins, where a officer of the law saw a light in the sky and then people encountered a horrifying creature, or creatures. Thompson and Patrolman Edward Wester of the Wenatchee Reservoir Police observed the same light at about 9:45 p.m. as it swooped low over the reservoir. The light was brilliantly white, Thompson said. It lit up the whole area for about 300 yards. In fact, it blinded me when I got out of the patrol car to look at it, and I couldn't see for about 20 minutes afterwards. 40 miles south of Wenatchee, in Elizabeth, New Jersey, two boys had a frightening experience that October 11th, at approximately the same time that Officers Thompson and Wester were watching this glowing object cavort above the reservoir. There had been a number of aerial sightings in the vicinity of Elizabeth the previous week, apparently clustered around the New Jersey Turnpike, which slices through the city. New Jersey newspapers, from one end of the state to the other, were filled with UFO reports during the period. The two boys, James Yanchitis and Martin Mouse Minov, were walking home along 4th Street and New Jersey Street when they reached a corner parallel to the turnpike. The turnpike is elevated, and there's a very steep incline dipping down from the busy thoroughfare to 4th Street. A very high wire fence runs along the street, making it impossible for anyone to scramble up the incline to the turnpike. There are bright streetlights on that particular corner, and it was on this corner that the two young men encountered the strangest guy we've ever seen, or the biggest man I ever saw. Kind of sounds like the very first SLENDERMAN sighting, right? It's like, is this an early SLENDERMAN? The first time? Anywho, this is from the boys who sighted the entity. Jimmy nudged me, Mouse reported, and said, "Who's that guy standing behind you?" I looked around, and there he was, behind that fence, just standing there. He pivoted around and looked right at us. And when he grinned, he had a big old grin. 3 days later, we visited Elizabeth, accompanied by UFO lecturer James Mosley and actor Chuck McCann. And that's why we're reading this bad boy right now, because John A. Keel was on the ground, boots on the ground, 3 days after these sightings happened. He was interviewing people. That rarely happens anymore. I know there's some great people doing it for MUFON, but it's not as reported on, or those people aren't writing books that we could read, or enough of them, or maybe I don't have them yet. If you've written one, send me one, I'll read it. Anywho, he gets there and he interviews the boys separately, as you got to do. You got to make sure the stories line up. At length, in the home of Mr. George Smith, and they both told the same identical story. The man was over 6 feet tall, they agreed, and was dressed in a sparkling green cover-all costume that shimmered and seemed to reflect the streetlights. There was a wide black belt around his waist. McCann, who was the star of his own TV series in New York, is a very large man, about 6 feet 2 inches tall. But both boys said the person they saw was bigger than McCann and much broader. He had very dark complexion and round eyes. They were real beady and set far apart. They could not remember seeing any hair, ears, or nose on this figure, nor did they notice his hands. He was standing in the underbrush behind the fence, and his feet were out of sight. There had been some incidents of violence in the neighborhood, and the boys did not stop to study this strange character. They ran home. Later, there were rumors in the area that a tall green man had chased a middle-aged resident down the same street that same night. We were unable to track those rumors down. The big mystery seemed to be, how did this man get behind that fence, and what was he doing there? We considered the possibility that it might have been a driver whose car or truck was in trouble on the turnpike overhead, but it seemed unlikely that he would have struggled down the very steep embankment and then just stood fixedly behind the fence. He certainly would have called to the boys and asked them to make a phone call for him or fetch help. But the boys seemed convinced that he was just quietly watching a house across the street. And this tracks with a lot of spring-heeled Jack sightings. If you've been with me for the Sunrise Book Club, we read a lot about Spring-Heeled Jack and the Mad Gasser, two of my other favorites. They both appear like this in strange coveralls, and they seem to be targeting certain people or certain houses. So the boys are saying that this version of the Grinning Man or Mad Gasser or who have you was staring at a certain house. So that's a similar theme. A giant grinning man stood behind a high fence on a street corner in Elizabeth, New Jersey on the night of a quote-unquote flap. That's when there's a lot of UFOs around. It hardly proved anything, but we have heard about the Grinning Man over and over again in our travels. A sewing machine... Man, here is a bygone job, R.I.P. A sewing machine salesman from Mineral Wells, West Virginia, Woodrow Derenberger, was driving home from Marietta, Ohio, on the rainy Wednesday night of November 2nd, 1966, when an object shaped like a chimney of a kerosene lamp dropped out of the sky and landed on the highway directly in front of the West Virginian's truck. So here we have it from New Jersey, home of the drones, the Jersey Devil, and other strange stuff in the sky and entities running by. We go to Ohio, land of the strange. So many cryptids, so many weird things going on in Ohio during the 50s and 60s, and probably now because things are similar. We have a West Virginian. Now remember, West Virginia is where this video game is set, where Mothman comes from. Grinning Man appears here too. Other famous cryptids that you could encounter in this game. It was pretty cool. But anywho, a West Virginian driving through Ohio, land of the strange, encounters a Grinning Man. Just as feels all connected. Anywho, Durenberger slammed on his brakes and stared in astonishment as a man emerged from the object and strolled towards him. He described the man as being about 6 feet tall, with a dark complexion and slightly elongated eyes. He wore a dark coat and blue trousers, which were shiny and had a glistening effect. Confirmation of the boy's sighting. Another slender man in beautiful coveralls. All right, so here we are from the vantage point of how it would be if Orange Eyes was peeking on us as we read. Back to Durenberger's story. As the man neared the door of the truck, Durenberger heard a voice ask him to roll down his window. The man stepped up to the door with his arms crossed over his chest and his hands hidden under his armpits. He grinned fixedly at Durenberger, and his lips never moved. Yet Durenberger directly heard a voice and conversed with this odd gentleman through mental telepathy. Their discussion was brief and rather pointless. The man said his name was Cold, and that he was from a country much less powerful than the United States. He asked Durenberger who he was, where he was going, and a few other simple questions. Then he said he would be back. He returned to the object, and it flew off. Woodrow Durenberger, who had never really read any UFO literature, thus entered the world of quote-unquote contactees, the great and the strange world. We've read a lot about contactees. They were heavy operating in the 50s and 60s. There's a good relic out here in the deserts of Southern California called the Integratron, built by a dude who was beamed this information. It's supposed to be a structure that could heal you through sound. Go figure. But it's pretty cool. Vibrations are kind of what everything is. But anywho, he died mysteriously of a, well, not mysteriously, supposed heart attack before he was able to really complete it. But anywho, the Integratron, George Van Tassel, go check it out. Contactees, really cool. So the night of Durenberger's first contact, 2 other men also reported identical incidents to the Parksburg police. Keel eventually tracked them down and spoke to them, and they were not from Parksburg. They confirmed our information, but said they did not want their names used. We do not want to get involved, one of them said flatly. Woody, however, agreed to a press conference and appeared on radio and TV. The local NICAP subcommittee zeroed in on him, urging him to tell his story to no one but NICAP. Woody, again, is the dude who encountered Ingrid Cold. He voluntarily submitted to an extensive physical and psychiatric examination arranged by NICAP. A leading local psychiatrist conducted the tests. NICAP was nonplussed when the psychiatrist himself became a contactee within a month of talking to Woody. Dang, they just start talking to you too. And now that psychiatrist admits both person-to-person confrontations and telepathic communications with UFO entities. While he talks freely about these contacts and his claim conforms to all of the patterns, he naturally does not want his name used. I mean, yeah, don't track me down. But he has talked anonymously on radio programs and backed Durenberger to the hilt. There are many other contactees in the Ohio Valley. Again, Ohio weirdness. There's a reason it's true. Most of whom were completely unknown to Woody. Only Durenberger's story of November 2nd received any publicity. The wire services circulated it nationwide, but his later experiences are not even known to the hardcore ufologists. It is certainly startling when quote-unquote contactees hundreds of miles from West Virginia recite details identical to things Woody had told us privately. And what he's talking about here is the common alien abduction experience. People report the same stuff. They report being taken to the same type of planets, the same type of rooms, the same types of entities. That's what he's talking about here. And that's what's interesting too. Durenberger's, the story you hear about Ingrid Cold is typically one of that landed, Ingrid Cold came out, said some weird words about being back, and then that was it. The true story of Ingrid Cold is that he contacted, the entity contacted Durenberger several times after, and even took Durenberger to other dimensions apparently. So we're going to read about that a little bit here. The real story of Ingrid Cold. Durenberger is not a learned man. Ingrid Cold and his funny companions told him they were from a planet called Lanulos, which was in the galaxy of Gamedes, and it's a large satellite planet of Jupiter. Woody claims that he has been there and visited a number of cities where the people wear colorful shorts. So according to Durenberger, Ingrid Cold took him to one of the planets around Jupiter, one of the moons of Jupiter, and there the people wore colorful shorts. And all the signs, posters, and etc. were written in a squiggly-like writing. The air and the temperature are identical to Earth's. That's nice. We stopped by to see Woody again in the spring of 1967, and we found him hiding behind drawn curtains, trying to avoid hundreds of UFO believers, skeptics, and the just plain curious, who invaded his property every night and every weekend. 60 miles south of Parksburg, in a little town of Point Pleasant, home of the Mothman, hundreds of people were quietly living in fear. About 7 miles north of the town, there was an expansive World War II ammunition dump known locally as the TNT area. Here we go. TNT area, Mothman's home, DuPont explosives, Grinning Man's home originally. What's going on under there? But anywho, the TNT area consists of several hundred wooded acres filled with concrete domes used to store explosives manufactured at nearby plants. Residents of this thinly populated sector have been seeing strange things in the sky and on the ground since the summer of 1966. One family in particular, Mr. and Mrs. James Lilly and their children, have had a full range of UFO activities around their home on Camp Conley Road. Okay, so Mr. and Mrs. James Lilly and their children, a very important case here. This is where Keel connects the dots to everything. My favorite umbrella theory, that if you have one weird thing going on, there's a bunch of weird things going on. If you have a light in the sky, you're going to have creatures running by. If you have ghosties and ghoulies in your house, chances are, if you went outside, you might see some UFOs or maybe run into an entity in the woods. All these things are connected. There's some sort of like frequency they're all on. Or I don't know. I have no clue actually. Just from everything we've read that maybe they're in the same dimension or on the same frequency. But anywho, the Lilly family. They live near the TNT area, just south of it. They first began seeing low-flying, luminous objects early in March 1967, but kept their sightings to themselves for several weeks. Mr. Lilly, a no-nonsense riverboat captain, freaking cool, on the Ohio, was skeptical at first and tried to figure out a rational explanation, as any good riverboat captain would. Now, when he says on the Ohio, that's the Ohio River. It didn't take us long to learn that when our TV started acting up, it was a sure sign that one of those lights was passing over. Electric frequency disturbances. Jim Lilly told us in April that he didn't think much of the flying saucer talk until he started seeing them himself. You've got to believe it with your own eyes. Automobiles in the vicinity of the Lilly home began to display the odd tendency to stall without cause. By mid-April, the word had leaked out that the Martians were visiting Camp Conley Road every night, and carloads of teenagers and adults swarmed over the area. Few were disappointed. Reporters, policemen, and Mason County Sheriff George Johnson were among the countless witnesses. So this was before Mothman. Bunch of weird stuff going on. It wasn't just our beautiful Mothman flapping around scaring people. During our in-depth interview with all the members of the Lilly family, we uncovered a number of significant incidents which have seemed totally unrelated to UFOs. In the fall of 1966, the Lillys started hearing odd noises around their little ranch house. They did not discuss these things outside their family, but they wondered if their home had not suddenly become haunted. Kitchen cabinet doors slammed in the middle of the night. Mrs. Lilly heard sounds like a crying baby. It sounded so plain, she said, that I looked around the house, even though I knew there was no baby there. It seemed to come from the living room, only a few feet away from me. Their daughter-in-law, Mrs. Doris Lilly, who lived in the south end of Point Pleasant, began to receive strange phone calls early in March of 1967, each evening around 5 p.m. A bizarre metallic voice speaking in an incomprehensible language would call her. It was guttural and rapid. These calls came only when she was alone. It was as if they knew when I came home, she noted. The same thing happened night after night. Finally, she was afraid to stay alone in the little bungalow. The phone company examined her lines and could not examine the calls or explain the calls. Okay, so the Lilly family, calls they can't explain, babies crying in the night, luminous objects in the sky. All this together really piques Keel's interest, so he dives deeper into the family. Part of the investigative routine includes a discussion of the witness's dreams during the flap periods when there's a lot of UFOs and entities running around. And one of our carefully phrased key questions is, did you ever dream there was a stranger in the house in the middle of the night? When we directed this question at the Lillys, Mrs. Lilly urged her quiet 16-year-old daughter, Linda, to tell about the nightmare she had that March. Linda was reluctant to discuss it, but with a little coaching from the sidelines, she told how she woke up one night and saw a large figure towering over her bed. It was a guy, she said, a big guy, very broad. I couldn't see his face very well, but I could see that he was grinning at me. Jim was working on the river, Miss Lilly added, and Linda woke me up with a terrible scream. She cried out that there was a man in her room. I told her she was dreaming, but she screamed again. He walked around the bed and stood right over me, Linda declared. I screamed again and hid under the covers. When I looked up, he was gone. She came running into my room, Miss Lilly said. She said there is a man in my room. There is. She refused to sleep alone ever since. When we asked for a full description of this man, Linda said she thought he had been wearing a checkered shirt. Occult literature is filled with references to ghosts wearing checkered shirts and the checkered floor in Twin Peaks. But the occultists tend to skip over this seemingly irrelevant detail. Completely unknown to the Lilly family, the man in the checkered shirt had appeared frequently in the home of Mr. and Mrs. George Glines in Pensacola, Florida. So again, from Ohio, from Jersey to Ohio down to Florida. Starting around 1963, during a hurricane that year, Mr. Glines said, I was lying on the couch in the living room with just one dim light on. I had a feeling that someone was in the room and looked up and saw a heavily built man about 6 feet tall wearing a plaid sports shirt. I got up and took a couple steps towards him. As I did, it looked like he took a step backward and disappeared. I turned on the light and he was gone. I didn't mention it till my son-in-law saw it because I didn't want to upset my wife. The Glines' son-in-law, James Boone, revealed that the man had turned up in his bedroom in the same house. Oh my gosh, no. I saw a large man, he said, a laboring type person standing at the foot of the bed. I couldn't see his face. When I started to get up, he went away. Several witnesses heard knockings on the wall and the living room. They finally tore the wall out but nothing unusual was found. George Jr., then only 2 years old, began to talk about his friend Pookie. Oh no. Ah! Thanks for coming in, Cat. Whom he described as a very big man in a colorful shirt. Mrs. Glines reported that little George told me that he couldn't see Pookie's face. It wasn't clear. Well, at least that doesn't seem too bad. Several relatives and friends heard footsteps in the house when there was no one there. In May 1964, the home burned to the ground. Pookie doesn't like the house all burned, little George told his mother. But he said he would come back when it was fixed up. Burning houses and mysterious fires go hand in hand with UFO flaps and the UFO mystery. The sudden destruction of a witness's home has been so frequent that mere coincidence must be ruled out. From Florida, we go back over west to New Mexico. Paul Villa had his little home burned to the ground soon after he released some photographs that he had taken of UFOs hovering low over his land. In West Virginia, an abandoned building in the TNT area burned to the ground in the midst of a pouring rainstorm, much to the bewilderment of the local fire department. Grass fires often erupt in empty fields hours or days after a UFO has reportedly touched down there. In some cases, the fires might occur weeks or months before the UFO activity begins, as is the case with Mrs. Bryant, the Ohio woman mentioned earlier. The home of the Jaroslaw family at Lake St. Clair, Michigan, was gutted by fire 2 years before Grant Jaroslaw and his brother Dan took some controversial UFO photographs over the lake on January 10, 1967. The family continued to live in the basement of the burned-out house, and when the UFO investigators later tried to check into the story behind the pictures, they found that the Jaroslaws had changed their unlisted phone number twice and refused to discuss the photos any further. Air Force Base Major Raymond Niles, operations officer at the nearby Selfridge Air Force Base, told the press, "These are the most amazing flying saucer pictures I've ever seen. You can even make out some sort of tail and antenna on the back." Dr. J. Allen Hynek stated that he thought the pictures were authentic, but the Jaroslaws became incommunicado. Why? What kind of nightmare were they actually living? And that Keel's referring to the fact that a lot of these reports, when they say just lights in the sky, oftentimes there's a lot of stranger stuff connected to it. Entities, ghost encounters, ghoulies, you name it. From Cape Cod, Massachusetts to the tip of Florida, we have heard of unidentified prowlers roaming the countryside at night. In Point Pleasant, West Virginia, strange, unearthly faces peered into the windows of homes, windows too high for an ordinary man to reach. In 1968, farmers in New York's Delaware County were chasing a giant, broad-shouldered grinning man with an unruly shock of silver hair. He was over 6 feet tall and pursued. He displayed remarkable agility, making it impossible leaps across wide ditches. Witnesses, some of whom claimed face-to-face confrontations with the creature, said it had small eyes and a fixed grin. A similar, if not identical, giant prowler appeared repeatedly in Provincetown, Massachusetts in 1966 and 1967. Multiple sightings across time during a very wild and politically charged time in history. The most recent case of this type comes from Springdale, Arkansas. At 11 p.m. on September 6, 1969, a man stared into the bedroom window of Mrs. Barbara Robinson. She called police, and Officer Ken Speeden discovered that anyone who looked through the bedroom window would have to have been at least 7 feet tall. There was nothing in the area of the window in which a prowler could have stood. In the spring of 1966, an Air Force WAF returned to her ground floor apartment on the edge of McGuire Air Force Base in New Jersey one evening and heard a sound in her bedroom. She went to investigate and found her window open and a pair of very pale hands with extraordinary long fingers resting on the windowsill, as if a man were about to climb in. She screamed and the hands withdrew. She found the Air Force police and they searched the area. Later, they told her that they had seen and pursued a prowler, a very tall man, with his sweater pulled up over his head. This WAF, a master sergeant, whom we have known for 15 years, was puzzled by our interest in this quote-unquote sweater. We asked her if she had ever seen any monk-like figures, and she recounted an incredible incident which she had almost completely forgotten. This is also a theme in entity encounters, UFO sightings. Typically, if you have one of these encounters, you've had one before, or you have had them multiple times, or when you do have one, then after that you have more. And then they might include entity encounters or just lights in the sky or whatever it is. So a common theme, right? Several years before, she had been staying in a motel in Mexico when she woke up one night to find a giant cowled figure standing over her bed. Not a man in a checkered shirt, but a being in a monk's robe. It extended one arm above her, she said, and she reached out to touch it. The second her finger touched the arm, the whole thing crumbled and disappeared. It felt powdery, like ashes, she explained. What have powdery ghosts got to do with flying saucers? Such stories are not uncommon, and in several cases, the objects themselves have reportedly disintegrated into powder when struck. On August 18, 1966, a disc-shaped object discharged some pieces of flaming metal directly over some telephone poles near Lions Lake, New Jersey. The witnesses retrieved some of this substance, which proved to be a honeycombed aluminum-like casting. Although they stored it carefully in a jewel box, it rapidly disintegrated, shrinking to the size of a pea. Since a thorough chemical analysis can cost upwards of $1,000, the metal has never been tested. Large, broad-shouldered men wearing capes and hoods have been seen all over the world, usually walking along desolate roads in thinly populated areas. Like many of the other creatures and characters involved in this mystery, they have an uncanny habit of disappearing without a trace. In October 1967, 3 men were driving along Route 2 in West Virginia when they saw a large caped man walking beside the road. They stopped and looked back, and he was gone. There were open fields on both sides of the road. An epidemic of hooded men, strange men dressed in cows and monks' outfits, or maybe a band of like merry pranksters. But all over the world, another common trope: mysterious monk men disappearing into the night and scaring motorists. Here's a direct report from American Ufologist about something like that in March 1967. I have been told of 2 similar cases in Minnesota. The first incident occurred last April. According to what the witness told me, he and a friend had been driving along the highway at about 11:30 p.m., and they were miles from the nearest town, and they could not see any other cars on the road. Since the land in northwestern Minnesota is very flat, their visibility was almost unlimited. So they were understandably shocked and surprised when in their headlights they caught 3 large men walking abreast and towards them from the other lane of the highway. The men were dressed in black cowls that covered the upper half of their faces. There were slits for their eyes. The strangers, whoever or whatever they were, paid no attention to the car and continued on as if it never passed. The second incident allegedly occurred here in Canby, Minnesota, several years ago. An acquaintance of mine was taking a shortcut home through an alley several blocks from where I live. He was not paying any particular attention to the direction he was going and almost walked into another person in the alley. The stranger seemed quite startled and turned to stare in surprise. The man was very tall and massive and was dressed in a black cape that covered the top half of his face. He seemed to be carrying something that resembled a large black bag. Strange men with strange doings, wearing strangely large cloaks. From the sightings in America of this strange kind of entity, we go to the sightings in jolly old England. On the evening of Saturday, September 21st, 1968, Mr. E. Bennett and his 15-year-old daughter were returning home from Wistondale, their Kent home, when at the bottom of Bison Hill, a conical-shaped mass rose slowly out from the field about 25 yards in front of them. It was 6 feet tall, they said, with a glowing aura surrounding it, and it seemed to vanish into a solid, impenetrable hedge. Mr. Sidney Webb of Pullman Market, Norfolk, reported that he was walking home along Mill Lane in February 1968 when he saw a tall, luminous shape glide in from an entrance in a hedge, travel slowly along the road, and then disappear. It was about half the height of a telephone pole. In Otley, Yorkshire, 4 young girls were taking a shortcut home past a churchyard in January 1968 when a tall, dark shape appeared. Though they were very close to it, they could not discern its face, and despite the frosty weather, no breath came from the figure. One of the girls screamed, but the figure took no notice and walked away with no sound of the footsteps. The church house, an inn in Torbrand, Devonshire, is said to be haunted by a ghost dressed like a monk, and has been... Mr. Keel, you write like... Oh my gosh, hold on here. I'm going to do that part over here. Take a little sip. The Church House Inn in Torbrand, Devonshire, is said to be haunted, for a ghost dressed like a monk has been seen there, and all kinds of strange sounds, manifestations, and power failures have taken place there in recent years. Are ghosts really UFOs and UFO entities, or are UFOs really ghosts? Take your choice. In July 1968, 3 schoolboys in Cumberland, England, were camping out when they saw a bright UFO-type light bobbing and weaving over the barren hills of nearby Cumberland Fells. One of the lads, Owen Moran, had a camera and snapped some pictures. When the film was developed, everyone was amazed to find that the object appeared as a pale light, resembling the head of a woman in profile, wearing a bonnet or a cloak tied under the chin. From Marlin, Arkansas to Mill Lane, Norfolk, strange and inexplicable things have been roaming freely and with a minimum of public notice. They walk through walls and solid hedges, appear and disappear at random without apparent purpose. Other men in hoods and cloaks stroll the moors of Scotland and the plains of Minnesota, traveling about on mysterious missions in isolated places late at night. Still others step out of unearthly flying objects to chat idly with passing motorists. Who are these people? John, I still don't think we have any clue who these people are. But if you're asking me if I believe that these entities are out there, that these good people from New Jersey to Minnesota to New Mexico to Ohio to jolly old England and beyond had encounters with this strange grinning entity that maybe now manifests itself as something like a Slenderman in the kid's mind, who knows, is out there 100%. We got Mad Gassers, we got Spring Heel Jacks, we got Mothman. Why not the Grinning Man as well? Why not the Grinning Man? If Sasquatch, why not? So I'm 100% in on the Grinning Man and all these sightings here. The most interesting part for me was learning about the strange cloaked men that have been sighted throughout history and around the world, appearing and disappearing, terrifying people, running about on strange missions, as old Keel talks about. That is our chapter on the Grinning Man, from the main source on the Grinning Man. This is where the Grinning Man primary source lives. Strange Creatures from Time and Space by John A. Keel, and any book written by Durenberger, the Grinning Man himself, of course, but Keel is more of a level-headed investigator that tussled with him. Seemed like a sincere guy. So Durenberger, Ingrid Cold, and the Grinning Man, I'm in on 100%. If you want to see some cool Grinning Man depictions, check out Fallout 76 and check out the Mothman prophecies. He's in both of them. Thanks for hanging out. That's all I got for you. Have a great rest of your night, week, or whatever. Ta-ta.